Alright guys, welcome back to another video. So before we get going on the project, there's one thing I want to mention really quickly. Remember how about a week ago I talked about how I cleaned up my lumber rack and I was getting the shop a little bit more organized and under control? Well, after one project, this is what it looks like. So this is one of the things that I have to deal with at some point in the future here is I'm thinking what I might do for my lumber storage is I might keep it vertical because that's the way I really like to store my lumber. So as you can kind of tell by the remnants of the organization here, I normally have my full boards at the back and then I keep all my small stuff at the front. The problem in a project like this where I want to use a bunch of full boards is I have to pull all the small stuff out so it gets scattered all over the place. Then I have to get the full boards, then I have to try and get stuff around and move stuff and it just becomes a disaster. Anyway, with this small blanket chest, all we have left to do is the cleanup on it, which is freaking amazing. So what I want to start with today is all of our ash components. So the tray as well as the bottom slats, because I want to get some milk paint on them right away. So that way I can build up a couple coats of that paint on them. Before we get around to applying finish to this whole piece, I want to get those coats of milk paint on there and get them built up all nicely. Okay, so while I'm hand planing the side of this tray here, I actually just kind of had a realization of a solution for all of my hand planing troubles. And that is hand planing downhill. So on the plane right now, I have a 40-degree blade that has cambered corners. So that means that the corners are just slightly rounded off so that they theoretically leave less track marks. Now, what I'm finding is that I would probably need to camber the edges even more because I'm still getting pretty decent track marks. But what I'm trying right now with the tray here is I have my blade just ever so slightly angled so that when I make a pass, on the right side of the blade, it is leaving a slight track mark, but on the left side of the blade, it's not cutting. Again, we're talking like micro adjustments here, very, very minor differences. But then what I'm doing is I'm always working from left to right. So that track mark that's on the right side, as I go further and further over, it eventually just ends up off the board and I'm getting a nice clean surface with zero track marks. So I don't know if this is an actual technique with using with the hand plane. I know that in most cases for finishing work with a hand plane, you're really supposed to have a good cambered edge so that you really can avoid the track marks and you're just supposed to, hand plane it like normal. But for me, this little trick is actually working a treat because it's super easy to do. It doesn't take any real effort to, slightly get your blade out of alignment just until you're just barely getting a track mark on, whichever side of the blade you want to work to. And then you just keep working to that edge and it seems to be working just fine. All of you hand tool users, let me know if this is a trick that is, well known within the hand tool community, or if there's a reason that I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to keep doing it on here because it's so far working for me. Okay, we've got the tray and all the bottom slats ready for the milk paint, and I'm super excited for this part. But quickly here, I want to talk about this tray, because this is the one thing in this project where I would change a few ways that I did things here. So first off, I talked about in the video where I made the tray, is rather than doing this 3 dovetails that are hand cut, I would do 1 machine cut or 1 hand cut dovetail for the size of this tray here. Just because having the 3 dovetails on here, they are pretty small, and I don't think they particularly match with the style of the rest of the blanket chest here. So I think doing just 1 large dovetail probably would have looked a little bit better. But it's not big enough that I would want to redo this whole tray. Another thing is the bottom of the tray here. I did these individual slats that then have a half lap going over each other. I've done this before and I never quite learned my lesson that this doesn't really particularly work very nicely. So I would do a solid glued up panel in the bottom here. You know, I'd actually take the time to make a panel for the bottom here, or I would just use a piece of plywood. But either way, yeah, the problem with these little slats is that there's just a lot of individual flex to them. So you don't get a nice flat bottom. You can feel each individual piece. It's really just because they're so small. This is basically the same way that we're doing the bottom of it with these bigger slats. But because these pieces are so small, they do have a tendency to move up and down and around. And because we're only using half laps between them, there's not a whole ton of support. So there's a decent amount of flex on each individual one. If you were to drop something heavy on a single one of these, it would probably break. And because I wasn't thinking about that part of it, when I put the tray together here, you'd end up having to replace the bottom of the tray. But again, it's something when I take this into more of a production style model, I know to put like a solid piece of wood down here. So what I'm gonna do to make this nicer, because we got all these lumpies and bumpies in here, it's not really that nice to touch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to glue a piece of leather to the bottom of this. Once we get everything painted and finished here, then we'll go in, attach our leather to the bottom here, and that'll make it really nice. This is the same technique I used in this tray here, which I really like. I might also have to go back into the bottom of this tray and add in some reinforcements like I did here, where I just glued these 2 pieces to 2 of the middle pieces here, just so that there's something in the middle area here, because I found that, especially on this tray, right in the middle, there's a lot of weakness. But yeah, just by gluing in that simple piece of leather, it really just cleaned up the entire surface here, gave you a nice flat bottom, and it looks really, really classy having that leather in there. So as for the milk paint, I've got 2 different samples here of colors that I'm planning to go with. So if you guys watched the video where I was experimenting with some milk paint, you know, doing some mixing and matching in that, this one is number 3, this one is the mysterious number 4 that I didn't really talk about in that video. But this one is a little bit more on kind of the forest green side, so it's got a little bit more of a dark green, you know, kind of like a pine tree kind of vibe to it. Whereas this one is a little closer to like a really dark sage, so it's a little bit more on the gray side. And both of these I kind of equally like. Now I think the one I'm going to go with is this one here, that's a little bit more on the grayish green side, rather than this one that's a little bit on the bluish green side, because this one's a little more subtle, and I think this might be the one I want to use in a project later on. So I would love to use it here to actually test it out, see what it looks like kind of en masse, because a small sample like this can only tell you so much. It's better to actually see it in a project. Plus, when I hold both of these samples up against some finished cherry, I think that this one blends a little bit nicer. It matches kind of the tonal range of cherry. Now, along with that, it's important to mention why I'm going with green rather than any other of the colors I could go with milk paint. And the trick is that for one, I really like green. It's one of my favorite colors. If you guys haven't noticed my pants before, I kind of like the color green a lot. Same with all my branding and that. I like the color green. But it's also a good contrasting color compared to the very red tone of cherry. And especially as cherry ages, it gets a much more, you know, dark red tone, which that's what I'm banking on, because that's going to blend very nicely with our green tone. So we're going to have some very good contrast. Okay, so our first coat on there is looking awesome. This is exactly what I was hoping for by hand planing these surfaces, because now we're gonna let this dry for about 1 to 2 hours. We wanna make sure that it's actually mostly dried up there. There's no moisture, no more water in there. Then we're gonna come back over with a maroon Scotch-Brite pad, and what that's gonna do is really gonna grind a lot of that paint, a lot of that pigment into the very open pores of the ash. You can see on this piece alone how much that grain is showing through that paint, which is exactly what I was hoping for here. And that is, yeah, that just looks so awesome. And so right now the paint color doesn't even look that good. As soon as we get another coat of paint on here, then we put some oil on them, then they're gonna look awesome. So we're gonna get all that beautiful grainy ash detail in all of these pieces, but then we're gonna have this nice, beautifully dark green color that's gonna go really well with the cherry. Okay, so it only actually took half an hour for these pieces to fully dry up, but one thing I wanna mention before we get on to buffing them with the maroon Scotch-Brite pad is make sure anytime you're dealing with the dry milk paint, you're gonna be buffing it like we're gonna be doing here, wear a respirator, something that is actually going to seal around your face, because milk paint is made with lime, which is very caustic, and if it gets in your lungs, it can do a serious amount of damage, way more than just normal wood dust will do. So make sure, again, anytime you're sanding milk paint, make sure you're wearing a full respirator or minimally a dust mask, just so you're not breathing that stuff in, because it's not going to do good things to your lungs if you get a ton of it in there. Guys, welcome to the Renaissance era of my woodworking. So what I mean by that is that if you told me 2 years ago when I got into fine woodworking, building like nice quality furniture out of good quality hardwoods, that one day I'd start painting them, I probably would have never believed it. But this is just absolutely amazing. Now I've got 3 coats on here. I'm gonna let these cure overnight to make sure that they're nice and really dried out. Then when we come back to the shop tomorrow, we're gonna work on finishing up everything, getting the lid mounted, all that kind of stuff, and really getting this chest done as much as I possibly can. And that's where we'll do our final finishing of all these pieces, get them rubbed down with that 3M pad, and get some oil on here, and then these are gonna be looking really good. I absolutely love the color they are right now. When they're dry, they're this kind of dark sage, but when they're a little more on the wet side, they're a really nice, rich, dark green. So I absolutely love it, and it's a toned down green. It doesn't have any kind of that bluey side in it. So I really, really love this color. So definitely in future furniture pieces, I'm gonna be incorporating milk paint. I absolutely love being able to mix in color. And the best thing about this is when you use the milk paint on the ash, you still get a lot of that beautiful wood grain in it. So it still looks like a piece of real wood furniture, but it's got this nice consistent matte color to it that you can't achieve with stain or anything like that. So it's just this amazing way to add some simplicity to a piece of work while still making it look good. And one thing I want to talk about really quickly here before we close out the video is one of my longtime subscribers, Walter Ryder, left a comment on the last video where I built the tray, talking about how in the lead jig, when I'm cutting dovetails, I should use a backer board to make sure I get less tear out. And the funny thing is I didn't realize it until I was reading his comment. Then I kind of had a moment of realization. When I was using that jig and I was cutting dovetails for the blanket chest, I was using a 3/4 inch backer. But the problem with that is my case pieces are 3/4 inch thick. And I had those dovetails about a 1/16 of an inch longer than the width of the panels. So the dovetails were about 13/16 of an inch long compared to my 3/4 inch backer board. So it's really not surprising that I got a whole bunch of tear out on there when my backer board was not supporting the cut in any way. So if I'm doing something like this blanket chest again, I need to take like a piece of 4/4 stock that's nicely milled down or a piece of 1 inch MDF and use that as my backer board so that it actually supports the router bit on the full cut, unlike what I did with this chest where there was a full 16th of an inch that was unsupported, which is why we got so much tear out. So thank you, Walter, for pointing that out to me. I'm really glad you pointed it out because I probably wouldn't have realized that without your comment. So thank you very much for taking the time to leave that comment. Anyways, guys, tomorrow is going to be a good day of just finishing work. We're going to get this blanket chest most of the way done. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.